So hello everybody, I'm heading this group here. So we are receiving input from two groups that presented at the beginning of this series of talks. And our task is to do fault blocks at upper crustal level and combine them with existing in situ stress data and figure out which block bounding faults are active. So we believe that the regional exploration defines the tectonic setting which controls character existence and non-existence of geothermal fluid flow systems. And our mapping really interprets upper crust of fault blocks and the existence and non-existence of in situ stress data on them. Each time when we see that out of 6 different types of in situ stress data, one of them is earthquake event-based one, we automatically define a respective fault as active. And if we work at the same scale, we can also look at fault block eras, and they serve as a proxy for a maximum area of the potential geothermal fluid flow system. I will get to this point relatively soon. So let's talk about methodology. So this is the input. Different types of faults distinguished based on the type of displacement, depth interval, combined with the crustal facies and igneous facies. So we are basically looking at several key mega tectonic settings, extensional ones, compressional ones, strike slip ones, and then obviously we do onshore, so we just look at cratonic regions. So we would have different bits and pieces of methods for different types of architecture. When we look at the extensional region, we are basically thinking about constellations of different types of constellations of main graben or half graben bounding normal faults, and they are all listed here by Bruce Rosendahl. We also need to think about what's the maturity stage of fault growth, where we are between nucleation and full linkage, whether we need to worry about relay ramps separating individual normal fault segments, or whether those relay ramps are already breached. The reason why we do this, that we try to map fault blocks that would give us a maximum expected size of a fluid flow cell. And I'm using this example from Lamp and Person from Upper Rhine Graben. And here we are looking at one fault block and another one. And based on temperature contours, we can see that we are looking at 2 topography-driven fluid flow cells. Each time when we have a recharge of meteoric waters, we see some cooling, and each time when we have a discharge, we can see warming effect, another cooling, another warming. So we try, when we look at data, with Africa, it wasn't such a big problem, but with Northern America, we almost have too many faults. So we really need to focus how many of them are just complexity of fault zones, individual elements of that, and how many are really the main ones controlling our blocks. And we really try to map a block controlling ones. And the reason for that, we can see it here. We can compare these 2 maps. This one is Basin and Range Province, and we are looking at temperature gradient from Kolbal et al. Over here, we are looking at a combination of different geological maps, state by state. Here we can see we have relatively wide horst here. It's much cooler than the background regime. And that's basically the reason is that it's a large recharge region for meteoric waters. So they are cooling the horst. And then we see two adjacent half-grabens, and thanks to them containing discharge regions, we can see that they're a little bit warmer. Or we can look at this one. This is another normal fault or system of normal faults. And here we can see footwall edge. So it's not a fully fledged horst, it's just a footwall edge. And still, it's large enough to serve as a recharge region, and that recharge has an impact on its thermal character. And juxtaposed to that, we can see half-graben, and we can see that it's again influenced by discharge of warmer waters. So when we look at the map like this one, we can see that each such a horst, for example, or just a footwall edge, contains lots of local faults. So we are not trying to map thousands of different fault blocks, but we are really trying to map fault blocks that matter, the ones which could host entire recharge region, the ones which control discharge. Now we can look at strike slip architecture. When we think about strike slips and large strike slip fault zones, they basically are formed by linkage of smaller ones. And they would have all sorts of structures when they link, like releasing offset, which would definitely behave as a separate block when we think about fluid distribution in that. Or they would have extensional duplexes, contractional duplexes, different types of fans, where we would like to really map individual structures as fault blocks. Examples of that, how complex a system of strike slip fault zones could be, comes from offshore Guyana, where we interpreted in a past set of 6 horizontal strike slip faults, with each of them having a horsetail structure. Each horsetail structure would control system of pull aparts, local ones, dark blue colors, and they will be divided by structural highs, light blue colors. But regardless of how complicated this structure could be, when we think about entire pull-apart basin, actually not entire, but just a check portion of Vienna basin pull-apart, we can see that for recharge, it could be entire margin in this part. So we don't really feel smaller scale structure affecting the location and occurrence of recharge, and rather distinction is on a larger scale. And you can see that the temperatures are cooler here, and we are at 1 kilometer depth. Then colder water comes down, sweeps the heat, if there are solubles in it, and eventually comes up in a discharge region, which in this case is a local high. And we can again see that local high we can really map as a larger block, not necessarily worry about smaller blocks, obviously, which are going to be very important at local exploration scale, but not at a regional one we try to provide. Now, how we map fault blocks in compressional architectures. Example comes from segment of West Carpathian accretionary wedge. We are looking at its Polish segment and Slovakian segment. And this is what we mapped. As you go deeper into the wedge, most of original faults get translated by reverse faults, thrust faults, and we see fully fledged thrust sheets. They are well bound by a frontal thrust, some rear thrust, and usually, especially if we are in orogenic hinterland, they are divided from neighbors by tear faults, strike slip faults, oblique slip faults. But when we are relatively in the front, these are just faults that got frozen and not develop any longer. So their mapping utilizes a system of synclinal axes. So this is our result for Africa. Unfortunately, I can't show you North American continent because we waited for input from other group, and it will take a while for us to do it. So we have to look at Africa, and here we can see 6 different categories of in situ stress data, which we processed from World Stress Map. And here you can see our polygons. Polygons showing us sizes and orientations of upper crustal blocks. And we are here color coding whether that particular fault block contains an in situ stress datum. If not, it's red. If yes, it's green. And you can see that sometimes we don't have data, or faults are so sparse that we can't really enclose them by any polygons. And it so happens to represent main cratonic nuclei in this region. What we could also do is to map the size of these blocks, area, and hope that the smallest ones and their organization in certain zones really indicates tectonically most complicated regions, like orogenic belts, or here we can see beautiful highlighting of western and eastern branches of East African rift system. And what we also try to do is to separate, if we do have in situ stress datum per block, we try to separate all other in situ stress data that don't necessarily tell us about whether any of its faults is active. We want to separate earthquake-related in situ stress data and highlight those blocks which have at least one of their boundaries formed by active fault in light blue. Let me sum up with the conclusions. We don't think that similar maps do exist to our knowledge. What we learned from Africa compared to North America, ideally, each continent should be made from geological tectonic maps of the same scale to be able to see tectonically complex regions and zones. In Europe, when we get different scales from different countries, some countries which are made on a much more detailed scale could give us a false idea that they contain very complicated tectonic zones. So we have to keep this in mind when we interpret, and especially in your case, North American continent, we really have to ignore lots of small-scale faults because your data set is really beautiful, but it's not really focus of this regional approach. And a disclaimer, our regional maps are not a substitute for detailed maps made at exploration block scale. Thanks a lot for your attention.